My name is Paige Afton, and I'm 32 years old. 3 days ago, I sat in a lawyer's office, read a single piece of paper, and laughed so hard the attorney put down his pen and asked if I needed a glass of water. My parents hadn't spoken to me in 2 years. Not a birthday card, not a single text. Then their lawyer sent me one document, 1 page. They needed my signature to sell my grandfather's lake house, the only place in the world that ever felt like home. That document was supposed to take something from me. Instead, it handed me the one thing my family never gave me: proof that someone believed I was worth protecting. Before I tell you what was in that letter, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. And while you're here, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to the Christmas dinner that ended everything. I grew up outside Knoxville, Tennessee, in a town where everybody waved at everybody and your business was never really your own. My father, Gerald Afton, managed the local branch of First Heritage Bank. Respected man, firm handshake, always wore pressed shirts to church on Sundays. My mother, Diane, ran the women's Bible study group and organized the annual harvest potluck. Together, they looked like the kind of parents you'd see in a frame at Hobby Lobby. And then there was Meredith, my little sister, 3 years younger, and somehow always 3 steps ahead in my parents' eyes. Meredith got piano lessons. I got a maybe next year. Meredith got a used Honda Civic for her 16th birthday. And I got a bus pass and a suggestion to ask around about part-time work. Meredith had the bigger bedroom because she needed space to practice. I shared a wall with the laundry room and learned to sleep through the spin cycle. I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you because it matters. My parents never hit me. They never screamed at me. They just allocated me differently. Like I was a budget line item they could trim without consequence. My father had a phrase he used whenever I brought it up. He'd set down his fork, look at me like I was being unreasonable, and say, "Meredith needs more help. You're the strong one, Paige. That's what I like about you." I believed him for a long time. I wore strong like a badge. I worked double shifts at the diner through high school, paid for my own prom dress, bought my own textbooks. As it took me years to understand that in my father's vocabulary, strong didn't mean admirable. It meant low maintenance. It meant she won't complain. It meant she's not worth the effort. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, a bachelor's in accounting from the state university, earned while working 25 hours a week at a tax prep office. 4 years. No help, no co-signer on my student loans. Just me and an alarm clock set for 5:15 every morning. My parents said they'd come. My mother picked the outfit she'd wear. My father asked what time parking opened. I reserved 4 seats, 2 for them, 1 for Meredith, 1 for my grandfather, Howard Afton, who was the only person who never once made me feel like an afterthought. The morning of graduation, my phone rang at 7. Something came up, my father said. Your sister's moving into her new apartment and she needs help with the furniture. I stood in my dorm room holding a pressed blouse and a pair of heels I'd bought on sale. I could hear my mother in the background asking Gerald where the tape gun was. "It's just a ceremony," my mother called out. "You already have the degree, honey." I walked across that stage alone, sat in a row of strangers' families, took my own photo using the timer on my phone, propped against a bench. That afternoon, my phone rang again, but this time it was Grandpa Howard. "I'm proud of you, Paige," he said. His voice was rough around the edges, the way it always got when he was trying not to cry. "And don't worry, I already took care of it." I didn't know what he meant. I figured he was talking about a graduation card, maybe a check tucked inside. I wouldn't understand what Grandpa Howard meant that day for another 7 years. I met Daniel Reeves when I was 26. He was rewiring the office building where I'd just started as a junior accountant. I heard him before I saw him, singing under his breath while tracing a conduit line behind the ceiling tiles. Something by Johnny Cash. Off-key, but committed. Daniel was an electrician. licensed, bonded, and running his own one-man operation out of a second-hand van with his name stenciled on the side. He worked 14-hour days. His hands were calloused and his boots were scuffed, and he brought me wildflowers from a gas station on our third date because he said the florist was closed and he didn't want to show up empty-handed. We got married when I was 28. Small ceremony, courthouse steps. Grandpa Howard had passed away 3 years earlier, and I still felt the hole he left every time something good happened, and I couldn't call him. My parents came to the wedding, briefly. At a family dinner the following week, my father sat at the head of the table, looked at Daniel across the roast chicken, and said, with the kind of calm that makes you doubt whether you actually heard it right, "I thought you'd aim higher, Paige. An electrician? That's a downgrade." My mother pressed her lips together. Meredith scrolled her phone. Daniel didn't flinch. On the drive home, he stared ahead at the road and said, "I don't need your dad to respect my job, but I need him to respect you." I wanted to cut contact right then. I almost did. But Grandpa Howard had only been gone 3 years, and something in me kept holding on, some stubborn belief that he'd want me to keep trying, keep showing up, keep being the strong one. So I stayed. For a little while longer. It happened at Christmas. 15 people packed into my parents' living room. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the kind of crowd where someone's always refilling the sweet tea and nobody notices when the music changes. Meredith pulled me aside in the kitchen. She needed $5,000. Third time she'd asked. The first 2 loans, her word, not mine, were still unpaid. She said it was for inventory for a boutique she was opening. I said no, politely, clearly. She walked back into the living room with wet eyes and a trembling lip. My father stood up from his recliner like he'd been spring-loaded. What kind of sister refuses to help her own family? He said it loud enough for the room to hear. Aunt Linda froze mid-pour over the punch bowl. My cousin Rachel looked at me with wide eyes. "You've changed, Paige," Gerald said, "and not for the better." Then my mother leaned toward my Aunt Carol, close, conspiratorial, and said just loud enough, "She's been like this since she married that man. I honestly think she needs to talk to someone, professionally." The room went still. 15 people. Not one opened their mouth. Aunt Linda looked at the floor. Uncle Ray coughed and reached for a cookie. Rachel stared at me like she wanted to speak, but didn't know how. I stood in the center of that room and felt something I hadn't felt since graduation day. Invisible. Surrounded by people and completely alone. I put on my coat, and I kissed my cousin Rachel's baby on the forehead. Daniel was already at the door, keys in hand, jaw tight. And I walked out of that house for the last time. Silence is a strange thing. You'd think it would feel peaceful. 2 years without the phone calls, the guilt trips, the holiday minefields. 2 years without hearing my mother sigh theatrically, or my father explain why Meredith needed more. But silence isn't empty. It's full of the things other people fill it with. Within weeks of that Christmas, my parents had a story, and they told it to everyone. Gerald called relatives. Diane cornered friends at church. The narrative was clean and simple. Paige is mentally unstable. Daniel is isolating her from the family. She needs professional help. My cousin Rachel called me in January. "Your mom told me you're seeing a therapist, and she said you had some kind of episode at Christmas. Are you okay?" I had never told anyone I was seeing a therapist, because I wasn't. My mother fabricated it out of thin air and served it to people who trusted her. It got worse. Gerald called my former boss, a man I'd worked for through college, to check in on me. In a town that small, a call like that isn't concern. It's a grenade with a polite fuse. Rachel told me later that my father described me to relatives as possibly a danger to herself. Those were his words. He weaponized mental health language against his own daughter because she refused to hand over $5,000 and sit quietly while her mother called her defective in front of the family. One by one, the calls stopped. Aunts I used to hear from at Easter, cousins who sent birthday texts, And the circle pulled tight around Gerald and Diane like a drawstring, and I was on the outside of it. By spring, the only person from my old life who still called was Rachel. Daniel and I moved to a town 45 minutes east, close enough to drive back if I ever wanted to. Far enough that I didn't have to see my father at the hardware store on Saturdays. I got promoted to senior accountant at a firm that didn't know my family and didn't ask. Daniel's business grew. He hired a second electrician, then a third. We bought a small house with a porch and a backyard and a kitchen window that caught the morning light. It was a quiet life, a good life. But every Christmas, I'd catch myself staring at my phone, scrolling through old contacts, hovering over names I couldn't bring myself to delete. No one called, not once. Daniel never pushed me. He'd sit with me on the couch, some game on mute, and just be there. One night I asked him, "Do you think I made a mistake?" He didn't hesitate. "You'll know when you're ready. And if that day never comes, that's okay too." I drove past the lake house once, Grandpa Howard's place, out on Cedar Mill Road. The dock was starting to lean. The paint on the shutters had gone gray. I slowed down but didn't stop. It hurt too much. Everything about that house was him. The smell of cedar, the sound of the screen door, the way he'd always have a chocolate milkshake waiting for me on Fridays when he picked me up from school. I kept driving. 2 years passed like that, ordinary days stacked on top of each other. I was healing, slowly, unevenly, but healing. Then, on a Tuesday in March, an envelope arrived. But it had a law firm's return address I'd never seen before, and it was addressed specifically to Paige Afton. That envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days before I opened it. 2 years of silence and then a letter from a lawyer. If you've ever cut contact with someone in your family and then gotten that unexpected call or letter, you know the feeling. That cold drop in your stomach. If this story is hitting close to home, go ahead and hit subscribe. And tell me in the comments, have you ever gotten a letter that changed everything? I opened it at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning, while Daniel was already out on a job. The coffee was still hot. The house was quiet. The letter was from a Mr. Brennan, attorney at law based in my parents' town. Professional letterhead, clean font, 1 page, and it stated that Gerald Afton was initiating the sale of a residential property at 14 Cedar Mill Road, Grandpa Howard's lake house, and that, as a potential heir to the estate of Howard Afton, I was being asked to sign a quitclaim deed waiving any claim to the property. There was a signature line at the bottom, a 30-day deadline, and a phone number for Brennan's office. I read it 3 times. 2 years. Not a birthday card, not a "how are you," not even a forwarded chain email. And the first time my family reaches out, it's through a law firm asking me to hand over the last thing Grandpa Howard ever touched. I set the letter down and looked across the kitchen at the small wooden shelf Daniel had built above the stove. On it sat Grandpa Howard's fishing tackle box, cedar wood, brass hinges, his initials carved into the lid. Like he'd left it to me in his will. It still smelled like lake water and linseed oil. Inside that tackle box, tucked against the bottom, was a sealed envelope I'd kept for 7 years. I'd found it when I was clearing out his things after the funeral. Yellowed paper, taped shut, with his handwriting on the front. For Paige, when you need it. I'd never opened it. I thought it was a goodbye letter. Something sentimental. Something that would make me cry. That night, for the first time in 7 years, I opened Grandpa Howard's envelope. My hands were steady until I tore the seal. Inside were 2 things. The first was a legal document, heavy paper, stamped and notarized. The heading read, Irrevocable Trust Deed, Howard R. Afton Family Trust. Below it, in clean type, the property at 14 Cedar Mill Road, commonly known as the Lake House, but was held in irrevocable trust. The trustee was a Mr. Calloway, Grandpa Howard's personal attorney. The sole beneficiary was listed on page 3, Paige Ellen Afton. The second item was a single sheet of notebook paper folded twice, his handwriting, slanted, deliberate, the way a man writes when his hands are strong, but his patience with pens is limited. Paige, I know your father. He means well, but he doesn't see straight when it comes to your sister. This house is yours. It's always been yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Grandpa H. I sat on the bedroom floor with my back against the dresser and I cried. Not the kind of crying that breaks you apart, the kind that puts something back together. He knew. Before I ever walked out of that Christmas dinner, before I ever met Daniel, before I ever stopped answering my father's calls, Grandpa Howard saw it, all of it. And he didn't just feel sorry for me. He did something about it. Daniel came home that night and found me sitting there, papers spread across the quilt. He sat down on the floor beside me, put his hand on my shoulder, and didn't say a word. The next morning, I called Mr. Calloway. He answered on the second ring. The trust is valid, he said. It's never been challenged, and your father's name doesn't appear anywhere in the documents. He saw me. He always saw me. I called Brennan's office that afternoon. The receptionist had the kind of voice that tells you she's already decided what you're there for. Are you calling to return the signed document, Ms. Afton? I'd like to come in, I said. I have some questions about the document before I sign. A pause, a keyboard clicking. Mr. Brennan is available Friday at 10. Friday works. I hung up and called Calloway back. I asked him to prepare certified copies of the trust deed, the original filing, the county stamp, the beneficiary schedule, everything. I'll have it ready by Thursday, he said. Then carefully, Ms. Afton, do you want me to be present at the meeting? No, but I'd like you available by phone. Understood. I spent the next 5 days doing something I hadn't done in 2 years. I prepared, not emotionally. I was past that. I prepared the way an accountant prepares for an audit. Documents in order, facts in rows, nothing left to assumption. I read the trust deed front to back 3 times. And I pulled the county clerk's filing records online to confirm the transfer date. I compared it against the probate records from Grandpa Howard's estate and confirmed what Calloway had told me. The lake house was transferred into the trust before Howard died. It never passed through probate. Gerald never inherited it. He just assumed he did. And nobody ever told him otherwise, because the only person who knew was Grandpa Howard, and Grandpa Howard had his reasons. Daniel asked me on Thursday night if I wanted him to come along. I shook my head. This one's mine. He kissed my forehead and handed me a thermos of coffee for the drive. The night before the meeting, Rachel called. I need to tell you something, she said. Your dad's been calling everyone, not just family, everyone. He's stressed, Paige, really stressed. About the house? About Meredith's store. It's in serious trouble. She took out business loans. Your dad co-signed all of them. I sat on the porch and let that settle. The crickets were loud. Daniel was inside washing dishes. Rachel kept going. 8 months ago, your dad refinanced the mortgage on the house, their house, on Birchwood, and put the money into the boutique. Your mom signed off on it. Now the boutique's tanking, the loans are due, and your dad owes the bank on his personal guarantee. I think it's around $180,000. $180,000. My father, the banker, the responsible one, the man who told me Daniel was a downgrade, had gambled his retirement and his home on Meredith's clothing store. He found a buyer for the lake house, Rachel said. $320,000. Enough to cover the guarantee and keep the boutique going another 6 months. And the only thing standing between him and that sale is my signature. Paige. He told everyone you'd sign. He said, Paige has no use for that house anyway. I stared at the dark tree line beyond our backyard. The same sky stretched over Cedar Mill Road. Thank you for telling me, Rachel. What are you going to do? I'm going to that meeting. Friday came. I set Grandpa Howard's tackle box on the passenger seat, the one that still smelled like cedar and lake water. I tucked the folder of trust documents into my bag. Then I drove 45 minutes back to the town I'd left behind. The drive was muscle memory. I didn't need GPS. My hands knew the turns before my brain registered the road signs. So past the Shell station where Grandpa Howard used to buy me chocolate milkshakes every Friday, Past the middle school where I once won a spelling bee and nobody from my family was in the audience because Meredith had a dance recital the same night. Past the intersection at Oak and 3rd where Grandpa Howard's pickup used to idle, waiting for me with the window down and the radio on. The town hadn't changed. Same brick storefronts on Main Street, same faded mural on the side of the hardware store, same church steeple poking through the trees like a finger pointing upward with conviction. I slowed at the stoplight on Elm, looked down at the folder on the passenger seat. Certified copies, county stamps, trust deed, Calloway's business card. I thought about the last time I'd asked my father about Grandpa Howard's estate. It was at the funeral reception, 3 days after they lowered the casket. I was 25, red-eyed, holding a plate of food I couldn't eat. "Did Grandpa leave a will?" I'd asked. Gerald had barely looked up from his conversation. "He didn't have much. The lake house comes to me as next of kin. That's how it works." He said it the way he said most things, like a man so used to being right that he'd stopped checking. He never hired a lawyer, never searched the county records, never considered the possibility that his own father might have made a different plan. The light turned green. I pressed the gas. I wasn't going back to fight. I was going back to finish what Grandpa Howard started. Brennan's office sat on the second floor of a red brick building on Main Street, above a dental practice. The stairwell smelled like old carpet and coffee that had been sitting on a warmer since dawn. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, looked me up and down when I gave my name. "Have a seat, Ms. Afton. Mr. Brennan will be with you shortly." There was something in her tone, not rude exactly, more like rehearsed sympathy, the kind of voice people use when they've already heard a version of your story and decided who the villain is. I sat in a vinyl chair next to a fern that was losing the will to live, opened my bag, checked the folder one more time. Trust deed, certified copy, county filing receipt. Calloway's card with his direct number circled in pen. Grandpa Howard's handwritten letter, sealed in a clear sleeve. Everything accounted for. I closed the folder and rested my hands on top of it. But my heart was steady. My breathing was even. I'd spent 2 years being called unstable by people who couldn't keep a boutique open for 18 months. I could handle a conference room. The hallway clock ticked past 9:58. A phone rang somewhere behind the front desk. I heard a door open. "Ms. Afton?" Brennan's voice was polished. Mid-50s, silver at the temples, the kind of man who says, "Let's get this squared away," and expects it to happen. He stepped aside and gestured toward the conference room. I stood, tucked my bag over my shoulder, and walked through the door. And there, sitting at the far end of the table, in a pressed shirt with his hands folded in front of him, was my father. Gerald looked up when I walked in. Same jaw, same posture, same way of holding a room like he'd already measured it and found it acceptable. "Hello, Paige." His voice was calm, gentle, even, the concerned father register, pitched just low enough to sound caring, just controlled enough to remind you who's in charge. I stopped 2 steps inside the doorway and looked at Brennan. "I was told this was a meeting between me and your office." Brennan adjusted his tie. "Mr. Afton asked to be present. I thought it might facilitate things." Facilitate. I repeated the word the way you'd hold up a garment in the wrong size, studied it, set it back on the rack. I sat down across from my father, set my bag on the chair beside me, placed my folder on the table, didn't open it. Gerald leaned forward, elbows on the mahogany, and smiled. "Sit down, sweetheart. Let's get this done quick. I know you're busy." "I am." "Look," he said, tilting his head in a way that was supposed to look conciliatory. I know things have been difficult, but this isn't about us. This is about the house. Your grandfather would have wanted this." He used Grandpa Howard's name. He sat across from me in a lawyer's conference room, the first time we'd been in the same space in 2 years. And he used the name of the one person who ever stood in my corner to try to move me out of it. My fingers rested on the edge of my folder. That was when I knew. This was never going to end. unless I ended it. Not with anger, not with a scene, with the truth, sitting in a manila folder on a conference table, waiting to be read. Gerald straightened in his chair and clicked into sales mode, the same cadence he used at the bank when explaining loan terms to people who didn't read fine print. The house has been sitting empty for years, he said. No one's using it. Yeah, I've got a buyer ready to close at 320. Your sister's business needs a bridge loan, and this solves the problem clean. Brennan slid a document across the table. I looked down at it. Quitclaim deed, in bold at the top. A signature line at the bottom with my name typed beneath it. I picked it up and read it slowly. Every word, every clause. The room was quiet except for my father tapping his index finger against the table, a rhythm he probably didn't know he was making. I set the document down. You haven't asked me how I am. Gerald blinked. What? In 2 years, this is the first contact, and it came through a law firm. I kept my voice flat, not angry, just clear. You didn't call, you didn't write, you sent a lawyer. He shifted in his seat. And we've been trying to reach you. My phone number hasn't changed. Brennan cleared his throat. Gerald ignored him. Paige, I'm not here to rehash the past. I'm here to handle a piece of property. That's all. And if I don't sign? The tapping stopped. Gerald's jaw tightened the way it always did when someone challenged a number on his spreadsheet. Then we all wait longer. It costs everyone more money. Don't make this complicated, Paige. Don't make this complicated. The same man who told 15 people I was mentally unwell. The same man who skipped my graduation. The same man who called my husband a downgrade. Don't make this complicated. I leaned back in my chair. Before I do anything, I'd like to understand why I wasn't told about the sale before a lawyer sent me a letter. Gerald's expression shifted. Not a crack exactly, but a recalibration. He turned to Brennan the way a man turns to a witness stand. We haven't been able to reach her, he said. Not to me. To the lawyer. She cut off the entire family 2 years ago. No explanation. No explanation? I repeated. Diane and I have tried everything. Gerald shook his head slowly, performing sadness the way he performed everything, with structure. She's been going through a difficult time. He was doing it again, the same playbook, same stage directions. Tell the room I'm broken, make the room feel sorry for him. Brennan was writing something on his legal pad. I couldn't see it. Her husband, Gerald added, dropping his voice a notch, has been a bit controlling. We worry about her environment. I felt my pulse tick up, not from fear, from the precision of it. 2 years later, and the script hadn't changed by a single word. He'd rehearsed it so many times it sounded like gospel. Brennan set his pen down and glanced at me. I could see the question forming behind his eyes. Is this true? I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct the record. I didn't list the receipts. I looked at my father, held his gaze, and said, Are you done? Something shifted in his face. The smile didn't disappear. It froze, like a projector catching on a frame. I'd seen my father handle resistance before. Employees, loan applicants, me when I was younger. He'd never seen me stop resisting. Gerald's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and held up a finger. 1 second, he answered. Speaker wasn't on, but in a room that quiet, with the kind of cheap speakerphone Gerald owned, you didn't need it. As Meredith's voice came through sharp and thin. Did she sign yet? Dad, I need to know by Monday. The landlord's threatening to change the locks. Gerald cupped his hand over the phone. I'm handling it. Give me an hour. But Meredith was already mid-sentence. Just tell her it's for the family. She always caves when you say that. The words landed in the center of the table like a glass hitting hardwood. Gerald pulled the phone from his ear and ended the call, his neck flushed red from the collar up. Brennan was looking at his legal pad. I folded my hands. She always caves when you say that, I repeated, quietly, word for word. Gerald set the phone face down. She's under a lot of pressure. Don't take it. I'm not taking anything, I said. I'm just listening. I looked at Brennan. He still hadn't looked up, but the pen in his hand had stopped moving. This was the negotiation my father had prepared for. Push the paper across the table, invoke Grandpa Howard's name, wait for the obedient daughter to sign, and drive home by noon. Instead, he was sitting in a room where his youngest daughter had just confirmed, out loud, to a witness, that the whole thing was a performance, a machine. Push the lever, watch page fold. I didn't fold. And in that small silence after Meredith's voice faded and the room reset itself, I made a decision. They weren't getting a signature. They were getting a conversation they should have had 2 years ago. Gerald stood up. The chair screeched against the floor. Paige, I've been patient. Sign the paper. He pointed at the quitclaim deed like it was a ledger that didn't balance. This house means nothing to you. You haven't been there in years. You're right, I said. I haven't. Because the last time I visited, you told my husband he was a downgrade. Gerald waved his hand. That was a joke. It wasn't funny. 3 words. I let them sit there. Gerald pressed both palms flat on the table. You know what your problem is? You hold grudges. Your mother was right. You need help. Professional help. Brennan raised a hand. Mr. Afton, let's keep this productive. Gerald didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on me. If you don't sign this, he said, voice dropping into the register he used to deny loan applications, I will take legal action. I'll file a quiet title motion. A judge will make you sign. I turned to Brennan. Can he do that? Brennan shifted. There are legal avenues, but let's not get ahead of... Okay, I said. Both men stopped. Okay? I reached for my bag and pulled the folder onto the table. The room felt like the second before a fuse catches. Before we go any further, I said, I have something I'd like to show you. I watched my father's eyes drop to the folder. He didn't know what was in it. Neither did Brennan. But something in the air changed. The way a room changes when the person who's supposed to be losing stops acting like it. I unclipped the folder and opened it. And I set the first page face up on the table. The document slid across the mahogany with the soft hiss of good paper on polished wood. Gerald looked down. The bold header was impossible to miss. Irrevocable Trust Deed, Howard R. Afton Family Trust. This is an irrevocable trust deed, I said, filed 7 years ago by Howard Afton with the county clerk's office. Gerald's head tilted. What are you talking about? It names me, Paige Afton, as sole beneficiary of the Lake House property. The trustee is Mr. Calloway, Grandpa Howard's attorney. I pushed the full document, all 8 pages, certified copy, county stamp on the front, to the center of the table. You're welcome to read it. The silence that followed had weight. It pressed against the walls of that conference room like a held breath. Gerald didn't touch the papers. His eyes moved from the document to my face and back again, as though he was waiting for one of them to explain the other. Brennan, though. Brennan reached for the trust deed immediately. He turned to the first page. Read it. Turned to the second. Read that too. Then he removed his glasses, pressed the bridge of his nose, and set the document down very carefully, as though it might detonate. And he looked at Gerald. I've been in enough meetings, quarterly reviews, tax audits, compliance calls, to recognize the exact moment a professional realizes the ground underneath the conversation has shifted. Brennan's expression didn't change dramatically. He didn't gasp. He didn't curse. He just looked at my father the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray when the break is worse than expected. And Gerald, still standing, still leaning on the table with both hands, finally stopped talking. The look on that lawyer's face, I will never forget it. I spent 2 years wondering if I was crazy for walking away. 2 years hearing secondhand that my own parents told people I was broken. And then I sat in a room and watched the truth land on a table in black and white. If you've ever been doubted by the people who were supposed to believe in you, hit that like button. This one's for you. Brennan set the document down and looked at Gerald, the way a man looks at a client who has just made his job significantly harder. "Mr. Afton," he said, and the formality in his voice was new, "were you aware that your father established an irrevocable trust for this property?" Gerald's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That can't be right. The house was part of his estate. It came to me through probate." Brennan picked up the trust deed again, turned to the filing page, and read the date. Then he looked back at Gerald. "According to this document, the property was transferred to the trust 3 years before your father passed away. But if this is accurate, and the county filing stamp suggests it is, the lake house would not have passed through probate. It would have been excluded from the estate entirely." Gerald stared. "That's impossible." "The county clerk's office would have the original on file," Brennan continued, speaking now with the deliberate calm of a man measuring every word for liability. "I'd recommend verifying, but this copy appears properly executed and notarized." Gerald turned to me. His face had gone the color of old drywall. "Where did you get this?" "From Grandpa Howard. He would never—" Gerald's voice cracked along the seam. "He wouldn't go behind my back like this." I held his gaze. "He didn't go behind your back. He protected his granddaughter." I paused. "There's a difference." The conference room was the quietest place in Tennessee. But the clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere outside, a truck downshifted on Main Street. Gerald slowly sat back down. His hands, which had been pointing and commanding and tapping all morning, lay flat on the table. They were shaking. Brennan loosened his tie half an inch and turned to me. "Ms. Afton, do you have contact information for the trustee?" I handed him Calloway's card. Brennan dialed the number on the conference room speaker. It rang twice. Calloway's voice came through, measured, unhurried, the voice of a man who'd been expecting this call for 7 years. Brennan identified himself and asked the question directly. "Mr. Calloway, can you confirm the existence and validity of an irrevocable trust established by Howard Afton regarding the property at 14 Cedar Mill Road?" "I can. I drafted it myself. And the trust was executed and filed with the county 7 years ago. Howard Afton funded it with the Lake House property during his lifetime. Paige Afton is the sole named beneficiary. The property has never been part of the Howard Afton estate and did not pass through probate." Brennan wrote quickly. Gerald sat motionless. "Is the trust currently active and unchallenged?" Brennan asked. "Active and unchallenged. I serve as trustee." Brennan thanked him and ended the call. Then he turned to Gerald with the careful posture of a man delivering news he didn't want to deliver. "Mr. Afton, I'm going to have to pause this proceeding. The quitclaim deed I prepared is not applicable. Ms. Afton has no claim to waive, because the property was never in your father's estate to begin with." Gerald shook his head. "That's my family's house. I grew up there." "I understand. But legally, as of 7 years ago, it belongs to the trust, and the sole beneficiary is your daughter." Brennan paused. His voice dropped slightly. "Mr. Afton, I should also mention, if you've represented to the buyer that you hold clear title to this property, that could create a separate legal issue." Gerald pushed back from the table. The chair legs stuttered against the floor. "You planned this." His voice was tight, strung between accusation and something closer to fear. "You've been sitting on this for 7 years, waiting." "I didn't plan anything." My voice didn't rise. "I didn't even open that envelope until your lawyer sent me a letter. You brought me here, Dad." The word hit the room wrong. Dad. I hadn't called him that in 2 years, and it landed heavier than I expected. For both of us. Gerald pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. When he pulled them away, I saw something I hadn't prepared for. He looked old, not just tired, diminished, like someone had pulled a thread and the whole pattern was unraveling. "Paige, you don't understand," he said. His voice cracked down the center. "If I can't sell that house, your sister, the business, I co-signed everything. Your mother and I refinanced the house. We could lose it. Our house." I heard the desperation. I did. And part of me, the part that spent 18 years trying to earn his attention, wanted to reach across the table. but I stayed where I was. You co-signed Meredith's business loan, I said. You refinanced your mortgage for her store. You put everything on the line for her. And in all that time, you never once, not once, called to ask how I was doing. Gerald's mouth opened, but nothing came out. And now you want me to give up the one thing Grandpa Howard left me, so you can fix a problem I wasn't part of creating. He would have wanted us to be a family. He would have wanted you to be a father to both your daughters. The room held its breath. Brennan gathered his legal pad and stood. He had the posture of a man trying to leave a room without tripping anything. I think it's best we adjourn, he said. Mr. Afton, I'd recommend consulting with a trust litigation attorney for your options. Ms. Afton, you're free to go. I stood, collected the trust documents and placed them back in my folder. The quitclaim deed still sat in the center of the table, unsigned, like a check that bounced. Gerald didn't move, and he sat with his hands flat on the table, staring at the grain of the wood, as if the answer might be somewhere in the mahogany. Paige! I stopped at the door. Please. One word, stripped of posture, stripped of strategy. Just a man in a conference room who'd run out of moves. I looked at him, and for a second, just a second, I saw the version of him from before. The man who taught me to ride a bike on Cedar Mill Road. Who let me steer the boat even though I always went too far left. Who once, when I was 7, carried me a quarter-mile through the rain because I'd lost my shoe in the mud, and he didn't want me walking barefoot. That man existed. He just got buried somewhere under the spreadsheets and the favoritism and the fear of Meredith failing. You know my number, I said. It hasn't changed. I walked through the lobby, from past the receptionist, down the stairwell that smelled like old carpet, out the front door. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. The kind of tired that 2 years of silence doesn't fix. But the meeting wasn't the end. Gerald didn't drive home. He drove to the lake house, and he brought Diane and Meredith with him. Rachel called me that evening. Her voice had the careful pitch of someone trying not to alarm you while delivering alarming news. Your dad drove out to the lake house after the meeting. Your mom and Meredith are with him. They're inside. I was standing at the kitchen counter, still in the blouse I'd worn to Brennan's office. Daniel looked up from the stove. They can't sell it, I said. They can't transfer it. Legally, there's nothing they can do. I know. But your dad told your mom it's their family home and no piece of paper changes that. I set the phone on the counter and stared at the ceiling. Daniel turned the burner off. What do you want to do? Call Calloway. Calloway picked up on the first ring this time. I explained the situation. He listened without interrupting, a trait I was beginning to deeply appreciate. They can't do anything to the property, he said. They can't sell it, lease it, or encumber it. If they refuse to leave, I'll send a formal demand letter. If they still refuse, we file for trespass. I closed my eyes. I don't want to have my father arrested at the lake house. Then let's hope he makes a smarter choice. I thanked him and hung up. Daniel was watching me from across the kitchen with the expression he wears when he's already figured out the wiring diagram, but is waiting for you to ask him to draw it. They'll leave, he said. You think? Your dad's a banker. At some point the math is going to beat the pride. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that Gerald Afton, a man who once refused to admit he'd overcooked a steak for 45 minutes, would see reason. He didn't. Not right away. Saturday morning, Rachel sent me a screenshot. Meredith had posted a photo on Facebook. The lake house porch, Diane holding a coffee mug, Gerald standing behind her with his arms crossed, looking out at the water. Caption: Family time at Grandpa's lake house. Some things are worth fighting for. I stared at the photo for a long time. Now Meredith was sitting in Grandpa Howard's chair. The green Adirondack he'd built himself the summer I turned 10. I'd sanded the armrests. He let me paint the first coat, said I had a steadier hand than he did. That chair was the last place he sat before his legs got too stiff to make it down to the dock. And Meredith was posing in it like a prop. The comments rolled in. A few relatives. So glad you're all together. A neighbor. That house holds so many memories. Nobody mentioned me. Nobody asked where I was. One cousin, Eric, who I hadn't spoken to in a year, wrote, "Gerald has every right. It's his father's house." I set my phone face down on the nightstand. Daniel brought me coffee without being asked. "Call Calloway," I said. By Sunday afternoon, a certified letter was en route. Calloway also sent a copy via email for immediacy. The letter read, "You are currently occupying property held in irrevocable trust. This constitutes unauthorized use of trust property. You are hereby requested to vacate the premises within 72 hours. Gerald wasn't dealing with a daughter anymore. He was dealing with a legal entity, a county filing, and a trustee who didn't care about Christmas dinners. Meredith deleted the Facebook post by Sunday night. The 72-hour clock started ticking. Monday morning, 41 hours left on the clock. My phone rang at 6:47 a.m. The kind of early that means someone either needs bail or believes urgency is a weapon. It was Diane. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Because even after everything, there's a muscle in your chest that contracts when your mother calls. So in 2 years of silence doesn't atrophy it completely. "Paige," her voice was raw. She'd been crying, or she wanted me to think she had. With my mother, you could never quite tell. "Please, your father can't sleep. Meredith's going to lose everything. This is tearing our family apart." I sat on the edge of the bed. Daniel was already awake beside me, eyes open, quiet. "This didn't start with a trust document, Mom. I know we weren't perfect, but is this really what you want? To take the house? To punish us?" "I'm not taking anything. It was already mine." A breath on the other end, sharp, offended. "And I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting what Grandpa Howard wanted. Your grandfather wouldn't want this." Her voice went hard. "He would want us together. I have a letter from him that says otherwise." Silence, a long one, yet the kind where you can hear someone rearranging their entire understanding of a situation. "You've changed," she said finally. It wasn't a compliment. "I hope so." The call ended without a goodbye. Diane hung up the way she always exited a conversation she couldn't control, abruptly, so she could tell people later that the other person was being difficult. I set the phone down. Daniel looked at me. "You okay?" I nodded. "She said I've changed." He almost smiled. About time someone noticed. They left on Monday afternoon. 53 hours, just under the wire. Rachel told me later that Brennan had called Gerald one final time. "If you don't vacate, you're facing a trespass complaint. And given the trust documentation, you won't win." Gerald packed the car. Diane collected the dishes she'd brought from home. And Meredith carried out a bag of groceries she'd stocked the fridge with, like she was moving in for good. They drove away from the lake house the same way they'd driven away from my life, without telling me, without looking back, and without once considering that the house had never been theirs to claim. I didn't go right away. I waited a full week. When I finally drove out to Cedar Mill Road, it was a Thursday afternoon. The sky was flat and gray, the kind of Tennessee spring sky that can't decide between rain and surrender. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the place smelled like dust and old pine. The kitchen was clean. Diane had wiped down the counters before she left. The couch cushions were straight, the floors swept. On the kitchen table, Gerald had left a single key and a torn piece of lined paper. His handwriting, far smaller than I remembered. "This was never about the money, Dad." I read it, folded it, put it in my coat pocket. I didn't know if it was true. I didn't know if he believed it. I didn't know if it mattered. I walked down to the dock. The boards creaked under my weight. Grandpa Howard's chair sat where it always had, facing the water, facing the tree line, facing everything and nothing. I sat in it. The lake was still. A heron crossed the cove, low and unhurried. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The numbers caught up with Gerald the way numbers always do. quietly, and then all at once. Without the lake house sale, the $320,000 lifeline evaporated. The buyer walked. Meredith's boutique couldn't cover its next quarter's rent. By June, and she closed the doors for good, sold the inventory at 40 cents on the dollar to a liquidator from Chattanooga. Gerald's personal guarantee came due. He sold his truck, the F-150 he'd driven since I was in high school, and pulled from his 401k early, eating the penalty. Between the two, he scraped together about $140,000. Enough to settle the guarantee, not enough to undo the damage. Retirement, which Gerald had planned for 62, got pushed to 67. Maybe later. The mortgage he'd refinanced still hung over the Birchwood house like a permanent weather system. In a town that size, the story traveled. Not through gossip columns, through driveways and church parking lots and the frozen food aisle at Kroger. People started asking questions Gerald couldn't deflect with a firm handshake. Why didn't he know about his own father's trust? Did Howard really cut Gerald out? And that daughter, the one they said was unstable, she had the paperwork the whole time? Gerald stopped going to Rotary Club breakfasts, stopped lingering at the bank after hours. He'd come and go through the side entrance and eat lunch at his desk. Rachel told me all of this in pieces, not to gloat, and not because I asked. She told me because she thought I deserved to know how the story I'd been exiled from was ending. I listened. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call Gerald to say I told you so. There's no satisfaction in watching your father shrink. There's just the truth, and the silence that follows it. Meredith took a job as an assistant manager at a furniture store in the next town over. Not a bad job. Honest work, steady hours. But a long fall from boutique owner, the title she'd embroidered on her business cards and pinned to every conversation for 2 years. She didn't post about it on Facebook. Diane pulled back from everything. She stopped attending the women's Bible study group she'd run for a decade, stopped organizing the Harvest potluck, stopped showing up to Sunday brunch at the Millstone Cafe, where she'd held court every weekend for as long as I could remember. Rachel told me why. People keep asking about you. How's Paige? Have you heard from Paige? Your mom doesn't know what to say anymore. The narrative she'd built, poor Diane, abandoned by her unstable daughter, suffering in silence, had developed cracks. The trust documents were public record, the timeline didn't lie, and in a small town, when the facts start to outrun the fiction, if the storyteller loses the room, I didn't feel triumphant about any of it. I didn't want my mother embarrassed. I just wanted her to stop rewriting my life for other people. Then, 3 weeks after the boutique closed, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I hadn't seen in 2 years. Meredith. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm sorry about what I said on the phone that day. I read it sitting on the dock at the lake house, feet dangling over the water. I didn't respond right away, but I didn't delete it. A week later, Rachel mentioned something else. Your dad asked about you. He wanted to know if you were doing okay. He didn't ask me to pass it along. He just asked. I let that sit. The extended family came back in pieces. Not all of them, not all at once, but enough. Aunt Linda called first. And she was the one who'd looked at the floor during that Christmas dinner, the one who heard Diane call me unstable and said nothing. I should have spoken up that night, she said. Her voice had the weight of someone who'd been carrying a sentence she couldn't put down. I saw what was happening and I didn't say a word. I'm sorry, Paige. I thanked her. I meant it. I didn't pretend it erased anything, and she didn't ask me to. 2 cousins texted within the same week. One of them, Marcus, wrote, I always felt something was off. I just didn't know what it was. I understood that. I lived inside the thing, and I couldn't name it for years. How could I expect people on the outside to see it clearly? Not everyone came around. Uncle Ray still believed Gerald's version. Cousin Eric, the one who'd commented on Meredith's Facebook post, never reached out. A few relatives went quiet entirely. Not hostile, just absent, the way people get when a story becomes too complicated to fit into a side. I didn't chase anyone. I didn't post a rebuttal. I didn't send a family-wide email with receipts and timestamps and a subject line that read, "For the record." I just kept living. Senior accountant, lake house on weekends, Daniel rewiring the porch lights, coffee on the dock in the mornings. People who needed to know the truth found it. People who didn't want it stayed comfortable in the version they already had. I made peace with both. Not everyone will understand, and I stopped needing them to. Daniel and I started fixing up the lake house in May. It wasn't a renovation, more like a conversation with the building, listening to what it needed. A fresh coat of stain on the dock, new screens on the porch, the bathroom faucet that had dripped since I was 12 finally got a new cartridge. Daniel handled the electrical, replaced the ancient breaker panel, ran new wire to the kitchen, installed a porch light that actually turned on when you flipped the switch. "It's what I do," he said, grinning, covered in attic dust. I found Grandpa Howard's woodworking tools in the garage, hanging on a pegboard he'd built himself, each one in its place. Chisels lined up by size, hand planes oiled and wrapped, a half-finished birdhouse on the workbench, like he'd stepped away for lunch and just never came back. In a box beneath the workbench, I found photographs. Me at 6 years old, standing on the dock with a bass that was almost as long as my arm. Grandpa Howard behind me, both hands raised, laughing, his hat pushed back. Yet his flannel rolled to the elbows. I held the photo for a long time. He didn't leave me a house. He left me proof that I mattered, that someone in my family saw me clearly, not as the strong one, not as the low-maintenance one, not as the one who didn't need anything, but as Paige, his granddaughter, worth protecting. I framed the photo and hung it on the kitchen wall, right above the window where the afternoon light comes in warm and gold. Every time I look at it, I hear his voice on the phone the day I graduated. "I already took care of it, Paige." He did. A month after the meeting at Brennan's office, I sat at the kitchen table in the lake house and wrote a letter by hand. Not through a law firm, not through Rachel, just me and a pen and a piece of paper. I wrote it to Gerald and Diane. "I'm not writing to punish you. I'm writing to be clear. The lake house stays in the trust. That was Grandpa Howard's decision, and I intend to honor it. I will not sell it, and I will not sign it away. If there's a version of our relationship that can be rebuilt, it doesn't start with paperwork. It starts with honesty. It starts with you seeing me, not as the strong one, not as the one who can handle it, not as the one who doesn't need anything, but as your daughter. My door is open, but only if you walk through it as my parents, not as people who need something from me." I addressed the envelope, stamped it, and dropped it in the mailbox at the end of Cedar Mill Road. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't check the mailbox every morning hoping for one. I'd said what I needed to say, and the rest was up to them. Daniel read the letter before I sealed it. But he didn't suggest a single change. He just nodded and said, "That's you." I used to think boundaries were walls, things you build when you're angry, to keep people out. I don't think that anymore. Boundaries are doors. You choose who walks through, you choose the terms, and if someone stands on the other side and